Hello, Northstar Big Book listeners. This is Carly, recovered alcoholic. As promised, I am going to be recording a new season. Unfortunately, the first time I recorded season 3, episode 1 was January of 2026, and it is now June, which just goes to show that being a teacher and a mother and a sponsor and a human and all of those things can be a little busy, but I did set a goal for this summer that I was going to record every day. So I'm going to do as much as I can, and I'm going to upload one episode every week, and we will go slow and steady from there. We are on the table of contents in the beginning of the book. This is season 3, episode 2. And it's going to go slow because I like to go through the mechanics of it, since the mechanics in the beginning actually made me feel safe, ironically, because my life was so crazy that just having something to go through that was black and white and didn't have a right or wrong answer, it just was, made my life feel a little less stressful when I was doing that big book work. And then when I would sponsor women and when I sponsor women and life is hard or something's going on in my personal life, when I come back to the book, it's very much the same. It is just, this is what we do, this is how we read it. And what I love about a podcast is that even if you don't feel comfortable taking someone through the book, you can always press play on a podcast of someone else doing it and you guys can sit together and practice. So I have the table of contents on the top of the page. I wrote down the steps breakdown. So next to it, I wrote step 1 at the top, and I wrote step 1 equals powerless. And this is just kind of identifying what all the steps break down into. Step 1 is powerless. Then I wrote step 2 is power. And the importance of that will become clear as we read the book and really understand how important it is to understand what the problem is. So powerless and then power. And next to the word power for step 2, I wrote chapters 2 through 4. So what I can assume from that is that everything from the beginning of the book until I get to chapter 2 is really going to be focusing on step 1 in the powerlessness. Obviously, it comes back into play throughout the book, but that's really where we're going to be learning the most about the foundation. And steps 3 through 12 is the last one that I'm going to be separating. So I have step 1 is powerless, step 2 is power, and steps 3 through 12 is how do you find a power? How do you find a power? And that, I just love how simple it is. We start with the problem, which is powerless. We go to the solution, which is power. And then we go to the directions, which is how do you find it? And 3 through 12 show us how to do that. And specifically, we will find answers to that question in chapters 5 through 7. Okay, then I'm going to break apart the table of contents, where in my book is a 3rd edition, I believe. So it might be a little bit different. Yeah, mine's a 3rd edition. It might be a little bit different in certain aspects, but the first 164 is going to be the same, including the doctor's opinion. So I bracketed on the side preface for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition. Some people might have 4th. And I bracketed that on the side next to the bracket. I wrote brief history of AA. Brief history of AA. And then next to the last part that we bracketed where it says the doctor's opinion, I wrote on the side the problem. And I underlined that really clearly. I have it underlined in red because that's where we find out our problem. And then next to the words the problem, I wrote powerless. So our problem is that we're powerless. And then next to that or above that, I wrote diagnosis. So I need to find out what's wrong. I need to know what's wrong. In order for me to know what's wrong and know what the problem is, I have to first be honest with myself and with somebody else. So I'm going to just make sure I'm setting a timer. So everything, okay, perfect. Then I'm going to bracket chapters 1, 2, and 3. So on the left side, I'll bracket it. Bill's story, there is a solution and more bad alcoholism. And I write on the side, step 1. So you see, we're going to be going through all the brief history of AA. And doctor's opinion is also where we're going to be learning the most about step 1. And it's a shame, I always like to mention this, that in the first edition of the big book, the doctor's opinion was on page 1. And until I got sober in AA, I never ever read any Roman numeral numbers. That was just like extra. Who wants to read that when that's not assigned to me? And I'm making it really clear to the women I work with, this is assigned to us. The doctor's opinion, without understanding the problem, we're just going into Bill's story, and we won't understand the pattern and the rhythm that we get to see in Bill's story of the mental obsession and the physical allergy. I can't fix something if I don't know what's wrong. There's so many areas in our life that we want like a quick fix, but nothing will work if it's not the correct solution. So we need to spend our time doing that. After I bracketed the left step 1, Bill's story, there's a solution in morbid alcoholism. On the right side of the bracket, similarly to how I did with the doctor's opinion, I wrote the solution, and I wrote underneath that power. So we've got the problem and we've got the solution. That's how the book is set up. Problem, solution, how to find a power. And on the side, I wrote next to that Carl Jung. Jung is spelled Jung. We'll read about him in a little bit. He was a famous psychologist, psychiatrist, thought leader, and helped us with how we look at our solution. Then I bracketed 4, 5, 6, and 7, chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. On the left, I wrote solution. So I bracketed 4, 5, 6, and 7. I wrote solution on the left. And then I'm going to write something next to each of the chapters. So next to we agnostics, I wrote step 2. Next to step 2, I wrote the solution. Step 2, the solution. Next to how it works, I wrote steps 3 and 4. And that's ironic because at least in the beginning of my sobriety, we read how it works at every single meeting I went to. And I thought that that was the program, but it's just talking about what our program is. We don't actually get into the work until we are actually in how it works. Like, so all the way up until we get to how it works, you think you're doing the work, but you're really just learning about it. Steps 1 and 2, identifying the problem, identifying the solution, I could do in my family room talking to another alcoholic that understands the problem and the solution. Step 3, we can get on our knees and pray. It isn't until we get to step 4 that I need to sit down and start writing. So next to how it works is steps 3 and 4. Next to into action, I wrote steps 5 through 11. And then I made one more bracketing on the right side, steps 3 and 4, steps 5 through 11. So where I wrote next to how it works into action. And I bracketed that again, and I wrote action necessary to recover. So action necessary to recover, that means I need to do steps 3 through 11 in order to get to the step 12 promise. And I promise the rest of the book is not going to be this detailed, mechanical, and boring, but it's also helpful for me to understand how the book is broken down. So action necessary to recover. So attendance at meetings alone will not give me step 12. And then next to chapter 7, working with others, I wrote step 12. I bracketed chapter 8 to wives, 9, the family afterward, 10, employers, and 11, a vision for you on the left. And I wrote examples of daily living principles. So you don't have to look at the title and be like, oh, I'm not a wife, I'm not a family, I'm not an employer. There's great examples, identification tools, scenarios, situations that might be helpful as sponsor, as friend, as family member, as boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, whatever, as child. So these are daily living principles. Next to the family afterward, chapter 9, I wrote steps 10, 11, and 12. We really get to see details of that. Steps 10, 11, and 12. Next to employers, I have step 12. And next to a vision for you, again, steps 10, 11, and 12. And we're going to get into how to do each of these steps. If you do not want to wait for each of these episodes to come out, if you go all the way back to season 1, I take you through the book from the beginning. I think I recorded that in 2017, and each episode, I believe, is like around 30 minutes. and is me reading the book from the beginning page until 164. And then all I did was I circled the words personal stories and I just wrote on the side in that blank space on the side three purposes. So there's three purposes for the personal stories. And I just wrote them like in a list, one, two, and three. One is help to identify. So that's one of the hopes of the personal stories, that it helps each reader identify or hope to identify, which is what our leads are supposed to be like, that someone could try to identify rather than compare. Something that I did in the probably first 5 or 8 years of my sobriety was, and I had undiagnosed ADHD. Um, I needed to listen, but I couldn't listen in meetings because I couldn't concentrate because I was looking around and I was checking people out and I was wondering about this and I was making up stories in my head and I was bored and I lost track and I was thinking about whatever. So, two things I did that really helped. One is the closer you sit to the front, the less people you have to look at. If you can get a seat in the front row, it like literally forces you to just stare at the person that's speaking. But the thing that's really helped me the most is I would write in journals while a lead was talking, or even in a group share where we're passing, commenting. Is I would give myself a task that I had to write down. If it was like a topic discussion group, I would have to write down one piece of information that I learned from the person that was speaking. If the comment or the lead was horrible, I would have to write down what they didn't talk about that I needed to hear, forcing me to look for the solution. And what it forced me to do is it forced me to listen and pay attention and to find something that was important that I needed to hear. Those are still tools that help me here today. The second purpose of the personal stories is to learn how someone finds an HP, a God, a higher power. And the third is that it shows it works. By someone sharing their story, they're showing it works. So, what I want to concentrate on when I'm leading or telling my story is things that people can identify with. So, what can people identify with? They might not be able to identify with my circumstances, but what they can identify with is the feelings I had, the thoughts I had, the things I tried to do and didn't try to do. That's what someone's going to understand and identify with. Okay, we are done with that table of contents. You can skip 4 pages until you get to the preface. And the preface, so this is the part, like I said before, I never read the Roman numerals. I'm still not even good at telling you which ones they are. In my book, this is XI, which means 11. I don't know what it is in yours, but I know you can find it. It says preface. If you have a later edition, it'll say this is the fourth edition, or if there's a fifth, I don't even know. Mine says this is the third edition. Before we get to that, I'm going to tell you a story, and you are welcome to write down these notes on the top. With my stories, obviously, you do not have to tell them, but I am a visual learner, and I learn the best from trying to remember stories and comparisons to better understand a concept that might feel like old or confusing. So, and ironically, I am a high school teacher, um, and I cannot follow instructions to the point where when I get something that has detailed, long instructions, I just will say, like, I don't understand this. Can somebody like walk me through it? Like, I'm dumb. One of my sons is really good at following instructions, and so he's like who has to put together everything when things come to our house. I get anxious about it. I feel overwhelmed about it. My brain stops computing, and it's probably why I did so bad in like science lab when I was in school. But this is the only set of instructions that I've followed, and I think it's because my life depends on it. So at the top, I wrote cake and recipe. So this is a story. You can write cake and recipe story if you'd like. And if you don't want to share it, you can just have it there. If you don't want to write it down, no problem. I wrote down this and then I'll share the story. I wrote, you want what they You want what they had, you do what they did. You want what they had, you do what they did. And then I wrote underneath that, follow the recipe. You want what they had, you do what they did, follow the recipe. So I picture Little Italy. I live in Cleveland. So Little Italy, I can picture the big hill. I can picture all the flags up and the quaint little restaurants and shops. And I've gone there since I was a little girl, and they are famous for their bakeries. I just went there and spent a ridiculous amount of money on my son's graduation bakery items. It's because they're so pretty in the cases and so just everything is done so beautifully. I cannot do it the way they do it. And that's why they are in business and I am not selling baked goods. So I picture this 13 layer vanilla wafer decadent cake that has like truffle icing and like just trifle, not truffle, that's mushrooms. Like it's like a trifle, I think is what it's called. It's like super layered, like so delicate. It almost looks like lace. And when they cut a slice and then they serve it, they lay it on the side on the plate. So you see like all 13 layers with the top and the icing, and it is so beautiful. And like you almost don't want to cut into it. And then when you take a bite, you're just like, shut up. It feels like an angel made this, or like this is God's recipe. And in fact, it is such a famous piece of beautiful cake that the shop is always asked for the recipe. And because they are really great at making this beautiful cake, they're willing to give away the recipe because they know that it's so detailed and so specific that most people are not going to follow it. They're not going to get put out of business because they share the recipe. So they actually have like a little pile of instructions for the cake recipe, for the decadent white angel 13 layer cake. And I asked them if I could look at it, and they're like, please take it. And it's 3 pages, stapled, single spaced, probably like 11 font. I'm already overwhelmed. And there's like bold writing at the top that says, you must follow the instructions exactly if you would like to have your cake taste like our cake. And that starts with the 3 grocery stores and specialty stores you need to go to get all the ingredients. Do not veer from these instructions if you would like to have your cake look and taste like ours. So I look at that and I'm like, 3 stores for cake? That's insane. I throw the instructions in the back of my car and I decide in my head that I'm just going to go to Aldi's because it's less expensive. And I'm not one of the stores they want me to go to is downtown and is only open certain days of the week. The other store is on the other side of town, and it's just a lot. In the store, I already decide that I'm not going to get one of the items that they called for because it's super expensive. I'm going to get the imitation vanilla rather than the original one that they told me to get. And I just go about those changes as I'm doing going through the instructions. So I brought that sheet into the grocery store. I put together a grocery basket that resembles some of what they told me to get, some of what they told me not to get, and a couple of things that I figure will make it better. I go home, and the first instruction asks me to separate the egg and the yolk and set the bowls aside and let them sit and rest, and then come back and do this and this. And I'm like, who has time for all this? They want me to bake certain parts of the cake at a very low temperature and set those aside. And this is a multi-day process. Fast forward, I do as much as I'm willing to do of the instructions, and I kind of figure out my own stuff because I actually said I was going to bring the cake to a party that night, even though the cake instructions say that it will not be ready for 3 days if I follow their instructions. And at the end of my baking extravaganza adventure comes out of the oven something that one could call a cake, but does not resemble their 13 layer angel beautiful cake. It looks kind of like a yellow pound cake, and it's hard and bitter, and there's no way I can serve this. And I'm mad. And I'm like, I don't understand. I took the instructions, I followed the instructions. What's the deal? And back to what I wrote in the book, if you want what they had, you do what they did. And that is what I like to think about, even though it's detailed, because that is what we are asking. We are asking each other to follow the instructions, not our instructions, not Carly's instructions or Kevin's or Sarah's or John's or Tim's. We're asked to follow the instructions that are written in this book that were passed down to us from the first 100 men and women, that were passed down to them, to other people, to us. And if we go about changing each part that we either don't like, don't agree with, or don't want to do the time for, like the cake, we will get something that does not resemble what they promise us in the book. And ultimately, one of my favorite ways, like I'll never argue with somebody that wants help. Like if they ask for help and we go through the book and we start going through the instructions and they're like arguing about what I asked them to do from the book, which by the way, I never ask anyone to do something that I'm not doing myself or have not done myself, and they're like, no, and they start arguing, I won't argue with them back. Like it actually tells me in our book, specifically about step 10, that we don't argue with people. And so I'll just simply ask them, like, are you getting the results you want with the current work you're doing? And I already know the answer. Nobody's going to come to me and ask them to help them and do work with them if they're already getting good results. They're coming to me specifically, someone like me, someone who has a big book in their hands, someone who is a big book thumper, and they're saying, I want help. I don't want to do the work you're going to tell me to do, but I still want help from you, knowing full well that that's what we're going to be doing. And the real truth is, I've sat down with people who have been relapsers and say that the program doesn't work. And something I like to split hairs about is that statement, because I think that that's a dangerous statement. The truth is, the program is actually perfect. I don't understand how or why, but it is, just from my experience, and the experience of all the people I've watched successfully stay sober and live lives that were attractive. The problem isn't the program. The problem is application. The problem isn't lack of knowledge. We don't talk about different things at meetings. At most meetings, if we're following the instructions and guidelines of how we're supposed to run the meeting, we're talking about the steps, the experience, strength, and hope. We're talking about alcoholism and the physical allergy and mental obsession. We're talking about what to do in certain situations as sober members and, how to be more effective. So there's not new information. We don't read different versions of the steps. It's all the same. The information's not different. It's the application. And I was told that the famous 4 words of all relapsers is I know and yeah, but. And so what I say to people when they say it doesn't work is, have you ever followed the instructions out of this book with a sponsor that's also leading you from this book, that's also done the same and is currently doing the same, not stop following the instructions from the first page until 164 and still not stayed sober? And the answer is always no. I've never in 27 years and 6 months sober seen somebody relapse who was following the instructions out of the book. I've seen them relapse who were going to 10 meetings a week. I've seen them relapse who were leading at podiums. I've seen them relapse who were doing a few steps. I've never seen them relapse who were doing the steps all the time. I've also seen them get better because of the steps, practice 10, 11, and 12, stop practicing 10, 11, and 12, and relapse. The deal is consistency, and it doesn't have to be pretty, and you don't have to like it, and you don't have to think it's a good time. I never want to go anywhere. I never want to do anything. It does not matter. God is so cool because God doesn't take away points for our attitude, which is shocking because I guess I come at that from a human place. Like if I ask one of my kids to do something and I have to ask them a number of times and they give me attitude about it and then they do it, I'll thank them, but then I'll also like let them know like, hey, that was not great the way you just spoke to me. God doesn't do that. God just says, nice, thank you. Let's go to the next thing. So it doesn't matter how we feel about the work, it just matters that we never stop doing it. Um, I also wrote underneath the cake and recipe, I wrote, we will try everything to do nothing. We will try everything to do nothing. I can relate to that so much. I I was a person in high school and college where I would do so much work to not do work, so much work to cheat or to get around something. I did that when I was using, I've done it in sobriety. Instead of just doing the thing that I need to do, I try to not do it and to talk around it and to spend a lot of energy. And at the end of the day, the work doesn't go away and I still need to do it. So if you're like that, I can relate. I did not come into AA and was like, please send me to the people that are going to have me do the work. Please show me where the big book thumpers are. I did not ask for that. I saw people like that and I veered away from them. And I went to the people that said, first step, first year, you didn't get sick overnight. You're not going to get well overnight. Let the steps rise to meet you. Because that to me felt like the easier, softer way. But it was ironic because it was like a scam. It was it was like promising me something, like promising me, right? Like these scams that you see all the time on TV or computers or digital, anything where they're like, get rich or, we'll buy your house or all the things that they promise us that all you have to do is work for 1 hour a day and you'll get $600. Like there's no such thing. And I did that in AA where they're like, you didn't get sick overnight. You're not going to get well overnight. Just sit here in first step, first year, first absolute. And what that got me is almost dead in AA. It wasn't until I was dying in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous without alcohol in my body, without drugs in my body, with no solution, going to meetings, a ton of meetings, and hating everything, which we'll talk about in a little bit with the mental obsession, that I got to a place where I was like, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Just, I cannot live like this. Okay. And then I wrote down two different things, and then we're going to read. I wrote the big book is the centerpiece. So the big book is the centerpiece of our recovery. I want my big book accessible. I have my big book that I like have when I go to lead, or that's what I use to like walk people through the book or the steps, or when I'm doing big book study. But I also always have like a book in my car. And if I'm going to a meeting where I know they don't have books, I like to have that. Because if it's on my phone, it looks like I'm on my phone. And I know that it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks about me, but it does matter what kind of leader or model I'm being to people because everyone's watching everybody. And that's a positive or negative example. And unless there's an emergency in my life, I don't want to be on my phone in a meeting. And if there is an emergency in my life, then I should get up and go out of the meeting to deal with it because people are dying around me and I need to treat that with sacred respect. So the big book is a centerpiece and has a recovery program. And then I wrote on the side, precise, clear cut, specific directions. Precise, clear cut, specific directions. So that's what the book's going to have. There's nothing general about it. If you look at the meetings that have steps and traditions on the wall, those are great, but they're not specific, clear cut. They're just like the headline of the story, and I need to read like underneath it, the subheading and all the instructions. The book has the specific, clear cut directions and instructions. So here you go. This is the third edition of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939. And in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. Now, remember, the book appeared in April 1939, but the program of Alcoholics Anonymous started well before that when Dr. Bob and Bill W. got together. So in 1934 is when Bill W. gets sober, like in the winter, at the end of 1934, and meets Dr. Bob in 1935 in June. And then those two go, sorry, Big Papa is my alarm. I'm going to finish that in 1 second. So those two are who go to number 3 and number 4, and that's how our fellowship begun. But our book did not start for years later until 39. So we're going to read that. I'm just going to finish this first paragraph and then we will lead off on this next time. So it said the second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,000 copies. The next part that we're going to be reading is really breaking down how we go about reading this book, and we will do that on episode 3. Again, they're never going to be this detailed again. That was just the first part. If you can't fall asleep, re-listen to that episode. I hope you have an amazing day. Thank you so much.